Salutations, one and all, and welcome to RWBY Revisited. In this installment, let's do something just a little bit different. Let's look at some of the semblances and other powers of RWBY, and assess just how powerful or useful they really are. Please be aware that spoilers for all seasons will follow, and any material revealed or expounded upon in outside sources will not be weighted as heavily as that seen in the show. So if a character demonstrates a new ability, or their semblance works differently in expanded works, then that will not be taken into account here. I will only be analyzing what we see in the show. Also, some characters might not use their semblances or other abilities to their full potential. I'll address some of those when we get to them, but some characters really could do much more than they have if they applied their powers in outside-the-box ways. Also, I won't be going over every semblance or other power here, just some of the most notable or most used ones. But with that out of the way, let me explain how I'm going to be scoring these. Note that there won't be scoring within the tiers, so anything you see within the same tier isn't necessarily being categorized as stronger or weaker than the other powers in the same tier. S tier is for the best of the best. These are game changers, and anyone with a power of this tier is either going to dominate a fight or get an insane amount of utility out of their ability. A tier are very strong abilities, but aren't necessarily as overpowered as S tier. They'll give an edge over anyone in a lower tier, but definitely have their weaknesses or counters. B tier is average. These powers aren't too strong or too weak. Theoretically, most powers should fall into this category, but we'll see if that's the case. C tier powers are lacking in some way. Maybe it's a strong power, but if it requires certain conditions to be used, then you won't get as much value out of it. Or if it doesn't provide that much of a benefit, then this is where it will be slotted in. Finally, F tier powers are the worst. They offer little to nothing to their wielders, or require too much setup or very specific conditions to activate. They aren't something that you would be particularly excited to have. 5 tiers gives a nice, even way of scoring things, with average, then better and worse than average, along with extremely good and very bad. So let's begin things with looking at our main characters. Leading off with RWBY, her semblance is Petal Burst. In earlier seasons, it was portrayed as simply a form of super speed, which in and of itself is immensely powerful. But as the show went on, it changed from less of a speed-based power to a semi-flight-based one. Even so, the range of this power is nothing to scoff at. It still does allow RWBY to move very quickly, but she seems to be slower now than in earlier seasons. She's been shown to be able to produce a tailwind strong enough to hurl Team Juniper into a wall along with everything else in range. This alone should allow for incredible amounts of crowd control in open spaces. Imagine a horde of Grimm or other nasties approaching your position. Using this ability would allow you to scatter them and devastate their formation, leaving most, if not all of them, vulnerable to subsequent attacks from range, like mortars. On top of this, she can use it to fly at a limited capacity. While other characters can use methods like gun recoil to propel themselves, that would require you to use ammunition, as well as make sure that you're not about to shoot someone behind you. Imagine blasting off with your weapon to engage an enemy, only to find out that your magazine is empty upon reaching your target. Not good. Petal Burst allows RWBY to largely negate those drawbacks, only costing her some aura. Mobility is a huge factor in a confrontation. A faster or more nimble opponent could outmaneuver you, or simply flee if things don't go in their favor. Being able to reposition would ensure that RWBY could dart around opponents quickly, catching them off guard and overwhelming them. During the fight in the Portal world at the end of Season 8, RWBY should have been able to wipe the floor with Neo if she used her semblance like this. RWBY would be able to almost blink behind her or to her flank, and there would realistically be little Neo could do except to counter with illusions. Even more than this, RWBY can forcibly carry others with her. This can let her move herself and allies quickly, or she could even move an enemy into a hostile situation, which she hasn't made use of for some reason. If you can just tell your enemy, hey, I don't like you here, and then drag them off to somewhere else with nothing they can do to stop you, you have a colossal advantage. RWBY could have used this to easily throw Neo off the bridges during that same fight. It honestly should have been more of a contest of who could wear the other down first. But Petal Burst isn't without its drawbacks. Moving others does seem to exhaust RWBY, as shown when she's out of breath after carrying herself and 4 others a short distance. She also produces rose petals upon using her semblance. Whether these linger around or are merely a visual effect is uncertain, but either way, it reduces her ability to be stealthy with this power. If someone is looking in her general direction, they'd see her red orb flying by and trailing petals. All in all though, Petal Burst is a very strong ability. I would give this A tier, as if RWBY used it to its full potential, she'd be a powerhouse, not necessarily even needing her weapon to end a fight, moving faster than an opponent could react to. Next on the roster is the Schnee family's semblance of glyphs. Now, this one is a bit strange, as it's shared between the Schnees. It's mentioned that semblances can be hereditary, but this is the only instance of one we've seen in the show. It can also do quite a bit. In its basic form, it can create runes that exert push or pull forces. This can be useful for forcibly repositioning enemies or allowing increased mobility for allies. Support units are often underrated. An individual that can directly increase the effectiveness of others is definitely a boon. But more than simply exerting force, glyphs can also conjure an ethereal form of a slain foe. We've only seen this used on Grimm, so it's uncertain if humans or Faunus could be summoned in this manner, but it does allow for an entirely different approach. This can allow a Schnee to have numerical superiority, assuming that the one using this semblance is strong enough to maintain the summons and not be a sitting duck while doing so. And on top of all of this, it can even directly manipulate elements through dust. Being honest, I've never liked how the Schnee semblance has so many wildly different abilities. Other semblances revolve around doing a specific thing, or involve actions directly related to one set of effects. The Schnee semblance is really a hodgepodge of various skills. Setting that aside though, this makes it quite a strong semblance indeed. Elemental effects include being able to create ice walls or fireballs at a moment's notice, restraining opponents, or providing support through the abilities of summons, such as combat or utility potential, like flight. It isn't a flawless power, however, as the force of glyphs can be overcome with enough force, and the elemental effects rely upon having dust available, which the wielder may not necessarily have on hand. What's more, the summoning ability seems to take a great amount of effort to learn, and it can potentially take time to complete, leaving the caster vulnerable. Interestingly, Winter uses summoning much more frequently than the runes, while Weiss for the longest time was the reverse. But something this versatile warrants A tier. It isn't foolproof, but it is decidedly powerful. If Weiss used her time dilation more often, I would have put this in S tier, but that hasn't been seen in a long time. The third of the main 4, Blake's semblance, is called Shadow. It allows her to create illusory copies of herself, and if you've seen my videos for any length of time, you'll know that I consider illusions to be a high tier power by default. Interfering with your enemy's ability to perceive situations automatically gives the one casting the illusions the upper hand. You could be a mid-tier fighter up against an amazing one, but if your opponent can't accurately tell what's happening, then beating them becomes much simpler. Or even escaping becomes easier, as your enemy will believe that they're attacking you, when in reality, you're long gone. Blake does have a few stipulations with her semblance though. She can only create images of herself. This means that she can't create environmental effects or make it appear as though someone else is around.
I'll never forget you. Me.
Instead, these illusions seem to possess a limited ability to have physical contact with the world around them instead of being simple manipulation of light or an enemy's mind. She can use these to help her reach otherwise inaccessible areas. Their ability to attack foes on their own, though, is quite limited, and they tend to dissipate after being struck once. In exchange, though, they can be augmented with dust to create explosions of different varieties when destroyed, leading to enemies being in a lose lose-lose situation. Either they gamble on the Blake in front of them being the real one and eat an explosion, or hope that it's a fake and possibly suffer defeat as a result. Unfortunately, Blake seldom makes full use of her semblance. She often uses it to escape a significant hit, but once the illusion is dispelled, she tends to be too far away from her enemy to capitalize on them being exposed from their attack. Her usage of dust to enhance her semblance has also been few and far between, which could potentially be extremely effective. But assessing Shadow, I would place this in A tier. It's powerful, but a little limited in its capabilities. The final member of the titular cast, Yang's semblance is called Burn. This allows her to gain energy from kinetic damage done to her to increase the power behind her physical attacks. While she can accomplish some impressive feats with this power, there is a major drawback. This power requires her to take damage to use it. Ideally, you should be able to win a fight without taking damage. This means that to get value out of this semblance, Yang needs to take damage, which isn't a luxury that one can always afford. Now, you might be saying, but this helps her out in tough fights, where she's going to take damage anyway. True, but that also has drawbacks. Yang will need to expend aura to withstand the damage to begin with, then use up still more to activate her semblance. This means that she would be blasting through her aura at double the rate that other characters would when they activate theirs. This could lead to her burning through her aura and leaving her vulnerable, with no aura shield to protect her or semblance to enhance her fighting abilities. Yang can pull off some incredible feats with burn, but its cost is just too high. Her hair also possesses a flame-like effect while burn is in use, though this doesn't seem to be able to damage anything, seemingly just a visual cue that her semblance is active. This semblance also does nothing to enemies outside of melee range, meaning that if she were to encounter a sniper or any other at-distance foe, then this semblance won't help her at all. For that, I would have to place it in C tier. It's powerful, but it simply takes too much to get value out of this semblance. But we still have more powers to assess. Team Juniper is next on the docket, so Jean is up first. His semblance is called Aura Amp, which lets him magnify the semblances of others. This has most often been seen in conjunction with Ren, letting groups of civilians become temporarily invisible to Grimm. The effects of combining his power with that of other characters could potentially be staggering, though we've seen no such thing in the show. Imagine RWBY being so fast that she almost teleports, Weiss creating dozens of glyphs or summons at once, or Yang being supercharged to absurd degrees. All theoretically possible, but none have occurred. Jean can also use this ability to heal others. Aura is used to heal humans and Faunus, and Jean can amplify another individual's aura to allow them to heal at an accelerated rate, thus bringing them back from potentially fatal wounds. And though we've only seen another ability used once in a training sequence, Jean can paradoxically use his semblance to regenerate his aura. How that works, I can't fathom. That would be like using the gas in your car to somehow get more gas, seeing as using a semblance requires aura, but it is what it is, I suppose.
You serious?
This should, in theory, allow Jean to tank incredible levels of punishment. He's been stated multiple times to have a higher than average level of aura, so this would potentially allow someone with this semblance to be a dedicated frontline fighter, shrugging off what would incapacitate or kill anyone else. It isn't perfect, however. Its effects relies on others having aura as well, which not everyone has. If a random civilian without aura unlocked was to be wounded, then this semblance can't be used to help them. Healing also takes considerable time, during which someone with this semblance must remain focused on their task and rely on others to keep any threats occupied. That isn't something that can always be counted on, as a focused or powerful foe could simply ignore or blow past the user's allies to attack them or their healing target. It also requires that the wounded individual not be immediately killed or put close enough to death that they will perish before any significant healing is done. This is definitely a worthy power, but its interactions with others requires that both parties possess aura, and it needs extended time to heal another. I'm placing this in B tier. Effective, but somewhat conditional. Nora's semblance is high voltage. This is similar to Yang's semblance, though it requires her to be exposed to electricity to enhance her physical abilities. Many of the same effects apply here as well. While Nora displays resistance to electricity-based damage, she is not immune and thus will be harmed by it and can even be incapacitated by the damage, potentially even killed. It also only augments her physical power, meaning that it does nothing for foes at a distance. Electricity is also something that can't be regularly counted upon to be present at all. If out in the wild, there will be almost no opportunity to utilize this power, and when indoors, electrical systems must be exposed and accessed to gain any value from high voltage. So similarly to Burn, I am placing this in C tier. Powerful, but difficult to trigger and limited in scope. The late Pyrrha's semblance was called Polarity. This allowed her to manipulate metal via magnetism. That's the official description anyway. Given that Pyrrha also manipulated non-ferrous metals, which are not magnetic, it would seem as though she can manipulate any form of metal at will. Seriously, when was the last time you saw a soda can made out of iron? This power, while simple in its effects, has the ability to be monstrously powerful. Metal is extremely common. We use it in buildings, devices on our person, and Remnant even has cybernetic enhancements that are made out of metal. Ironwood would have been at Pyrrha's mercy had the two ever gotten into a fight, as most of his body would have been susceptible to her semblance. Even something as simple as a belt buckle would render someone vulnerable to Pyrrha, letting her use that as a projectile. Weapons more advanced than simple sticks or rocks would also be useless against Pyrrha, as she would be able to either wrench them out of an enemy's hands, or crush them into a ball, or cause them to swing back into their wielders. Though the scale of the objects being manipulated does increase the strain put on Pyrrha. When lifting the wreckage of the elevator and beacon, she was visibly using a great amount of effort, though such displays would seldom need to be used. Now, more remote regions that aren't as settled or populated might be lacking in available metal, but that could be more easily rectified than with other conditional semblances, as even carrying a small bag of metal shards would allow for a hail of projectiles. I believe that was why Cinder was crafted in the way that she was as a character. In the beginning, she wears only a simple dress without any metal on her person. Even her weapons are made of glass, severely limiting Pyrrha's ability to shut her down. Given the strength of this semblance, I can't place it any lower than S tier. It's simply too strong to ignore and is likely a major factor as to why Pyrrha was killed. She would have been too powerful for the scenarios ahead. Ren is next, and his semblance is Tranquility. This renders those under its effects invisible to Grimm, blocking their ability to read the emotions of humans and Faunus. While effective in this task, this is extremely limited. Against anything other than Grimm, this power does nothing. That isn't to say that this is a bad power, only that it has one use. In that use, it's extremely effective. Grimm seem to be utterly incapable of locating anyone under its effects, and this can be applied to anyone within a radius of Ren himself, not requiring physical contact. Tranquility does gain another ability, and it's to see the emotions of others. On its own, this would be of little use, aside from perhaps allowing the user to mind game an opponent by seeing their emotions, provoking rage, fear, or despair. If this could be applied to see them through solid surfaces like walls and floors, then this could be immensely powerful at negating stealth, though we have seen no such thing. In short, I'm placing this in C tier. Effective at remaining undetected by Grimm, but of little use in any other scenario. With teams RWBY and Juniper analyzed, let's have a look at some others, shall we? We'll have a look at two very similar semblances at once here, those of Neo and Emerald. being overactive imagination and hallucinations respectively. While they both revolve around creating illusions, they do so in very different ways. Overactive imagination allows Neo to create illusions akin to altering light in an area, allowing anyone present to see something different than what is actually there. Emerald instead affects the mind of her target or a small number of targets, causing them to perceive or not perceive things without anyone else being the wiser. This leads to their applications being quite different. Originally, Neo's illusions would shatter like glass if struck, and she could make herself appear to be someone else. This allowed for easy infiltration as well as misdirecting opponents in combat. She wasn't limited to creating images of herself like Blake is, thus allowing for more flexibility. Upon landing in the Ever After, Neo spontaneously gained the ability to create fully tangible illusions that could engage in combat for her, even when they were nowhere near her. This allowed for her to have her own force of completely loyal combatants, mimicking many people and creatures. Emerald's hallucinations are often employed as support for another fighter, most commonly Cinder. Again, if an enemy can't correctly discern the situation they find themselves in, then beating them becomes much easier. Hallucinations can also be used to trick a single enemy or a small group, possibly getting them to attack friends, who obviously wouldn't be expecting them to attack, and seeing as it only affects one target, the others would be none the wiser. Both of these powers belong in S tier. They are simply too strong to be any lower. Another power used by the antagonists is Moonslice. This is the semblance of Adam Taurus, and it allowed him to store energy that struck his weapon, then release it at a time of his choosing. This is similar to Yang's Burn and Nora's High Voltage, though at least it doesn't require Adam to take damage to use. However, this does require him to be wielding a weapon. If he's disarmed, then he cannot use his semblance. This also begs the question as to what he can use with his semblance. Can he pick up a stick and use that, or does it need to be something more durable? It does grant him limited ranged abilities, though these sort of attacks are too slow to be effective at anything other than close range. We also don't know how long Adam can store this energy, or what the upper limit of the stored energy can be.
I am the danger.
But, given its very similar nature to the aforementioned semblances, this also ranks in C tier. It's very strong, but still limited in its usage. Cinder's semblance is Scorching Caress. Now, given that Cinder has either had partial or full maiden powers since Season 1, it's a bit difficult to determine what is her semblance and what is magic. Scorching Caress has the ability to heat whatever Cinder was touching, hot enough to melt metal as evidenced by her breaking of Pyrrha's weapon, and caused no damage to herself. This is how Cinder created a multitude of weapons early on, reshaping sand into glass via her semblance. She can even use this ability at range to create explosions by superheating material. Like Polarity, the description of this power is very simple, but it is quite strong in its effects. Though this power isn't bordering on overpowered, it can still see a wide variety of applications, as it can be used in both close and medium range, as well as being a consistent source of damage. Simply put, this belongs in B tier. Not too strong, not too weak. Another notable antagonist is Tyrion, and his semblance is called Aura Disruption. This allows Tyrion to attack while bypassing an opponent's aura, localized to the area in which he struck. This is similar to Ren's Tranquility, having a limited use, but being very strong within that niche. Now, I've never been much of a fan of aura shields, as we seldom know how much a character has remaining to protect them, but Tyrion helps to level the playing field by being able to bypass it altogether. Normally, if we see a character get hit, it's a toss-up of whether they'll just shrug it off or be brought down by it. Against Tyrion, any attack can be lethal, and armor would be essential in fighting him, though this power only has an effect if its user is facing someone who also has aura. If they don't, then there will be no value from this semblance. Given that this is slightly more applicable than Tranquility, as humans and Faunus are more intelligent than Grimm, I'm placing this in B tier. Hazel was a simple character, and his semblance is just as simple. Numbing Agent allows him to stop feeling pain. This can be powerful in the short term, but have negative effects in the long term. Pain is an immediate signal to our brain that something is wrong. It's sometimes questioned that if we could create AI as intelligent and as capable as us, would it be ethical to allow them to feel pain? I would say yes, as not only is it an instant indication that damage is being done, but it also allows for empathy. It's like how puppies learn that biting hurts by playing with each other, and thus they understand that they shouldn't do that to others. It's an essential part of our consciousness. In brief usages, it can help one overcome difficult opponents, but it doesn't stop the user from taking damage. Overdoing it with this power could cause the user to get in too deep, only to be permanently damaged because they ignored their body telling them that there was a problem. This belongs in C tier. Useful in small bursts, but detrimental if overdone. Moving on, let's have a look at the Aesops and have a crack at their powers. Clover was their leader, and his semblance was good fortune. This caused him to have intermittent good luck, allowing things to go his way. Now, I'm not a fan of this sort of thing. Firstly, it can activate on its own, and thus should theoretically drain his aura whether he wishes to or not. Secondly, luck is inconsistent. It is luck after all. It doesn't have any direct effect, and can thus fail to have meaningful impact. Worse still, this could cause an over-reliance on its effects, causing someone with this power to act recklessly. Luck is also just bad from a writing standpoint, as it calls into question whether characters overcame something through their own skill and hard work, or just got lucky. This belongs in C tier. It's inconsistent, and it did nothing to prevent Clover's death. As a tangent, Crow has the inverse of this power, and his is called Misfortune. It occasionally causes unlucky things to happen to himself or those in close proximity to him. Similarly, this should in theory cause his aura levels to drop sporadically. But his semblance doesn't only affect him. It can affect opponents as well. Now, if it affects one party negatively, then it affected the other positively, unless the effect happened to both of them. That changes things a bit from being only bad luck to possibly being good luck, depending on the recipient.
I don't need luck, I have ammo.
In short though, this is our first F tier power. Bad luck isn't something you would probably pick, given the choice. But back to the Aesops, Harriet possesses super speed. This is similar to the effects of Ruby's Petal Burst, but she doesn't possess the ability to carry others or fly. Instead, she's able to move the rest of her body very quickly. This can let her strike at an incredible rate, and had she taken Team RWBY seriously, she would have been able to solo them, attacking faster than they could react to. Being that fast would have similar effects to illusions. If your enemy can't react in time, then you could be much less skilled than they are and still win. This also means that enemies can't escape you, or it could allow the user to get away from bad odds with ease. S tier. This ability is far too potent to be anything less. Vine's semblance was called Aura Vines. This allowed him to extend the reach of his arms and legs. While simple, this can be quite an advantage, especially in melee combat. Increased range is nothing to scoff at. If you can hit your opponent, but they can't hit you, you have a very good position. This is one reason why the bow and spear dominated in ancient warfare. English longbowmen were renowned for just how far and quickly they could loose their arrows. Even their skeletal remains show reinforcement due to just how much strength it took to use those bows. Back to Vine, not only does this increase his range, but he can also make these constructs large enough to snatch an entire person or even contain a vehicle. That sort of capability is extremely useful, as an opponent would need to either be fast or nimble enough to avoid his grasp. But he could also potentially use this to increase his running speed. While he certainly wouldn't be as fast as, say, RWBY or Harriet, increasing his stride length would cause him to be able to run significantly faster than most people, in addition to being able to grab onto and reach higher elevations. This belongs in A tier, very useful in a wide array of scenarios. Elm has a similar ability, Aura Roots. Her semblance allows her to create aura constructs that can anchor her in place. While this would be very useful in our world, preventing someone from taking you to the ground in a physical confrontation, RWBY is a bit different. Characters tend to have insane levels of mobility, and thus combat tends to favor agility and dexterity over raw hardiness. Elm anchoring herself in place can potentially just leave herself open to attack. On top of that, if your feet are anchored in place, it limits your ability to turn. Try standing somewhere and imagine that you can't move your feet. Now imagine that someone is approaching you from the side or behind. You would have to disengage that semblance to face them. And if you're having to turn your semblance off and on all the time, it kind of defeats the point of having one. In her fight against Yang and Blake, it's seen that the floor can be broken, leaving her with chunks of it stuck to her feet. This means that the aura roots don't go that deep and can potentially be exploited if her opponent understands how it works. But it's not all bad. This power could potentially allow her to scale walls by planting her feet on it one at a time. She could even wait in ambush on a ceiling by anchoring herself to it. This is a simple power, but I'm slotting it into C tier. It has some use, but it can also hinder its wielder. The final member of the Aesops is Marrow, and his semblance is called Freeze. It allows him to completely halt an enemy or small group of enemies completely in place, unable to move. It goes without saying that this is extremely powerful. Halting an enemy is almost a guaranteed win, as Marrow does not need to remain stationary to use this power. While doing so, they can't fight back unless there is a power that they can utilize that doesn't require movement. Combined with allies, this would all but ensure that Marrow comes out on top unless he's taken by surprise. Targets caught within Freeze are shown to still be able to speak, however, meaning that they can potentially call out to any nearby allies for help, as well as move their eyes. The drawback of this power is that the user needs to maintain their focus on the target or targets caught within it, leaving them susceptible to being blindsided or needing to release their current targets to shift their focus. Marrow is shown to point at his target along with yelling "stay" as he activates his semblance. Whether this is a requirement or simply something to help him focus isn't clear, however. Even with these shortcomings taken into account, this is easily an S tier. A solo fight against someone with this semblance is almost a guaranteed loss unless one ambushes them. And now we come to the head honcho of the Atlas forces himself, James Ironwood. His semblance is called Metal. Now, the only details of this semblance come from external sources, as it's never mentioned at all in the show. It allows Ironwood to strengthen his resolve and focus. Okay, wow. Where do I start with this one? Really?
Ah, this is bad!
This might be useful for doing menial and tedious tasks, but that's it. It might help you push through pain, but that's about all it can do. There really isn't much information regarding this power. It could be a subtle ability to heighten Ironwood's senses, or something that completely consumes his judgment, or anywhere in between. We can't say for certain. F tier. This is a genuinely garbage semblance that seems like it was concocted on the fly, but a more interesting power also originates from a character native to Mantle. Robin's semblance is lie detection. By taking another person's hand with her semblance active, she can discern whether they are telling the truth. If they are, then the glow between her hand and the other person's will turn green. It's unknown if it will become a different color if they're lying, or if it remains purple, but either way, it guarantees that someone cannot lie to her. Now, I suspect that a weakness of this semblance would be that if the recipient believes that they're telling the truth, then that may be what the semblance is looking for. It would be like if you hung out with Jerry yesterday, and then Robin uses her semblance to ask you how he was. You'd answer along the lines of, "Jerry's great, we were hanging out yesterday." But unbeknownst to you, Jerry was hit by a big rig on his way home and is now dead. You believed that he was fine, but in actuality, he's a bit less alive. That's just speculation, of course, as the alternative would involve Robin's semblance being omniscient. While this has no value in combat, as a resource for weeding out information, this is incredibly strong. This ensures that accurate information is always given, as someone can either refuse to take her hand, which would be tantamount to an admission of guilt, or tell her the truth. Now, we don't know if telling only partial truths or omitting details would proc the semblance, But either way, it's still powerful. Ozma was so worried about who he could trust, but for some reason he never thought to try bringing Robin into the fold. He obviously has some metric to determine whether or not someone is worthy, and he's brought on others like Goodwitch, and Robin's semblance would be extremely valuable. It's unlikely that he wouldn't know about potential political candidates in one of the kingdoms. I would slot this into A tier. No good in combat, but for gathering intel, this is extremely handy. But Robin has a crew of her own. May has the semblance called Invisibility Field. As its name implies, it renders people and certain objects inside invisible to those outside the field. It's unknown how large or small this field can extend to, but as far as stealth goes, being invisible is easily a high-tier ability. Those inside the field seem to produce less audible noise, but they are not silent. This also brings into question whether those inside can be smelled. If you had perfume or cologne, or had been through a fight and were covered in sweat and grime, could someone outside the field smell you? That reminds me of the time when I worked on a freight team and got showered in hot sauce that had broken open in one of the boxes. I reeked of it for 2 days, no matter how much I cleaned myself. Everyone knew when I was nearby. In short, A tier. It's very strong, but not unbeatable. Fiona is in possession of an absurdly powerful semblance. Pocket dimensions. Yes, that's just as insanely overpowered as it sounds. She can absorb things via touching them, and it's been seen to work on something as large as an entire truck. This is absolutely insane. Imagine using that in a fight. Just grab someone and poof. They're gone until you choose to release them, and people say that semblances are weaker than magic. I have only to point to this semblance to counter such a claim. Honestly, this could potentially be an outright way to beat Salem. It wouldn't be good or compelling writing, but if Fiona could grab her, which we have seen Hazel do successfully, then that's game. Salem's gone forever.
Phenomenal cosmic powers!
Itty-bitty living space.
S tier. This is the strongest power in the show, bar none. A handshake from Fiona is putting your life in her hands. I covered Crow's semblance earlier, but let's have a look at his siblings. Raven has a semblance called Kindred Link, which allows her to create a portal from herself to someone she cares or once cared about. Whether she has to consciously choose that she cares about this person, or whether it happens subconsciously isn't clear, but there seems to be no limit to the range of this power. This can be a powerful tool in keeping track of team members, so it's ironic that it belongs to the character that cares for no one but herself. This power is limited by only being able to create portals to people rather than to specific locations. If everyone you have a connection to is with you at the time, then your portals would do almost nothing. Granted, if she can choose which way the portals are oriented, Raven might be able to redirect projectiles through them, though we can only speculate on that front. Overall, this is a fairly balanced power, but somewhat limited, and thus I'll be putting it in B tier. Another character that was once prominently featured in the show was Sun, and his semblance is Via Sun. Via Sun, I'm not certain how that's meant to be pronounced. It allows him to create multiple projections of himself that can take action on their own. They can withstand damage and fight, unlike Blake's illusions, but Sun must remain inert while using this power. This means that he is completely vulnerable while his power is in use, and thus must either be protected by allies or position himself out of the way beforehand. This can let him take multiple actions at once though, so it isn't completely underpowered. Still, its major drawback of needing to be still while using it grants it C tier from me. An extremely strong semblance that I don't see mentioned much is that of the minor character Talk. Despite only appearing in one flashback, I was shocked by just how powerful her semblance was. It's called Invulnerability, and just as its name indicates, it grants her complete immunity to damage for a full minute. Can you imagine? Pretend you're being attacked right now, and you can't hurt your opponent for 60 seconds. And you're dead. A minute is forever in a fight. Even more so if your opponent is completely immune to damage like some kind of Resident Evil boss. Being shot, bludgeoned, stabbed, slashed, burned, strangled, all of it is off the table. This also means that Talk wouldn't have to worry about defending herself at all and could be far more reckless than any sane person could afford to be in a fight. The downside is that her aura completely breaks after the duration. There also doesn't seem to be an aura requirement for this ability. She could potentially have full aura or be almost depleted and still activate it, pushing her durability still further. Really, Maria only survived through luck. S tier. This can get nothing less. Finally, let's look at magic. That's why I called this the powers tier list, not the semblances tier list. Magic has been mostly elemental based when we've seen it in combat, though other forms exist. While nothing to scoff at, some semblances are far more powerful than elemental blasts, which makes magic seem rather lackluster. The Maidens almost exclusively use elemental-based abilities, and while Ozma and Salem have been shown to use beams of energy, their effects are unknown and thus truly can't be quantitated. Ozma has been seen to strike multiple times in a second, but has never used this ability for an extended period. It can also create a massive explosion, though this was stated to have been possible through storing power in Ozma's cane for an extended period and not done by an individual all at once. Ozma did grant Crow and Raven the ability to transfigure themselves into birds, but we've never seen someone like Salem become something more fearsome. The vaults may have also been created through magic, but there isn't confirmation on that. The characters seem to react to magic as though it is far more powerful and obviously different than semblances, but as we've seen, some semblances far outstrip magic in what they can accomplish. Given its vague nature and limited usage in the show, I place it in B tier. It's strong, but largely undefined and pales in comparison to S tier powers. But that's going to wrap up this tier list. There are some powers that I didn't cover, but most of them have seen much less use or have fewer implications than the ones mentioned here. What do you think of it all? Do you agree with me, or do you think I'm full of it? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and leave a like on this video if you're so inclined, and subscribe to see more. I would like to thank you for watching, and may you all have a weapon in each hand.